Amistial Majoris. 7 of the 8 companies dispatched by the Howling Griffins became engaged in a grueling trench war on Amistial Majoris. Having broken through the Death Guard plague fleet, blockading the world, the 2nd to 8th companies arrived in time to bolster the regiments of the Astra Militaris Drukian Fenguard, who were suffering horrific losses to the hellspawn epidemics unleashed by the traitor forces arrayed against them. Within solar days, the Howling Griffins and the Legio Astorum's Titans were the only forces able to man the extensive defenses constructed by the Drukians. Any warrior caught in the open and not protected by power armor when the plague winds hit was ensured an excruciating death and an eternity of servitude as a plague zombie in Nurgle's legions of undead. The first company of the Howling Griffins, including the chapter master Abbadon, was at the time based on the chapter battle barge Force of Destiny, and was engaged in the persecution of a particularly vicious company of Night Lords Chaos Space Marines, known as the Chosen, commanded by the infamous demon prince Periclitor. It was widely known that the Howling Griffins harbored a particularly deep hatred of this demon prince, while that hatred served the greater needs of the Imperium's defenses against the forces of chaos. No other authority sought to question Avalor's actions. The Iron Knights chapter had been engaged upon a self-imposed penitent crusade for a number of solar decades when Abbadon's 13th Black Crusade smashed into the defenders of the Cadian Gate, and they were amongst the first of the chapters in the region to respond. The chapter's elite first companies soon became mired in the defense of Amistial Majoris, bolstering the flagging defense of the Howling Griffins chapter as they fought a grueling trench war against the unremitting assaults of the Plague Marines on the Death Guard Traitor Legion. The war zone soon became a plague-ridden quagmire. The decomposing bodies of the plague god's victims forming putrid, sucking swamps through which the defenders were forced to wade in order to bring battle to their forces. A sickly patina of filth soon mirrored the Iron Knight's gleaming blue-gray armor, and the company's chaplains were forced to perform daily rites of purification in order to keep the virulent plague at bay. Recent sermons by these chaplains have linked the chapter's continuing presence in the war zone with their eventual redemption in the eyes of the Emperor, vowing that the world would only fall at the cost of the entire chapter. By the 3rd solar week of the Black Crusade, Amistial Majoris was considered sufficiently secure that a portion of its Space Marine defenders could be spared to reinforce the Cadian system, which in the days following the destruction of St. Josmain's Hope, I don't know how I used to pronounce this, was in desperate need of aid. Bellis Corona. Upon arriving at the Cadian Gate, the Doom Eagles chapter dispatched forces to a number of war zones, notably areas that had already suffered terribly at the hands of the forces of chaos. The largest of these detachments, under the command of Captain Luctus of the 3rd Company, was involved in the operations within the Bellis Corona subsector of the Bellis Corona sector, where the notoriously pious chapter battled those who had fallen to the curse of unbelief. Only those without the strength of faith to resist were afflicted by the zombie plague, and it had been noted that not a single Doom Eagle's battle brother was affected by its blight. The Doom Eagles proved effective in combating the plague zombies, infesting many worlds of the subsector, though, typically for this aloof chapter, they had refused all offers of support in consolidating these successes. Adeptus Astartes reinforcements. A number of other Space Marine chapters contributed to the overall defense of the Cadian Gate during the 13th Black Crusade. These chapters include Harbingers. Although they had most recently been purging orks from the Piscinian belt, the Harbingers chapter had an old score to settle with the Death Guard. The chapter's enmity towards these traitors could be traced back to a raid on their homeworld of Birmingham. I'm not joking, it's Birmingham. The Black Planet by the Death Guard, aided by the infamous renegade known as Fabius Bile. Their chapter master, Nimrod Nimrod Grudge received early word of the outbreak of the Plague of Unbelief and mobilized the chapter accordingly, leaving most of the chapter either in the Piscinia system or on the Black Planet. The Harbingers 1st, 4th, 5th, 7th, and 9th companies boarded their battle barge, unrelenting fury, and set course for the world of Nemesis Tessera. Immediately upon their arrival, they were recruited for a special mission, as the Harbingers were known for their skills in the art of boarding space hulks and launching planetary assaults. It could only be assumed that their mission involved the use of that particular skill set. Marines Exemplar. Led by their chapter master, Commander Maxime Absalon, the Marines Exemplar committed all but a single reserve company to the defense of the Cadian Gate early in the conflict, arriving less than a solar week after the Space Wolves chapter. Accepting Logan Grimnar as the more experienced commander, Absalon allowed his companies to be deployed according to the Great Wolf's strategy, which saw them dispatched across all war zones of the Segmentum to bolster those imperial defenses most in danger of falling. Tragically, Absalon was lost in the opening phase of the conflict, as his company attempted to extract the senior staff of an astropathic way station before the forces of Abbadon overwhelmed the jungle moon on which it was located. The 5th Columnus Regiment, a terror guard unit led by the demagogue Colonel Job, was making a push towards the Bellis Corona system, but at first to secure the jungle moon. Greatly outnumbered, Absalon led his forces in a desperate breakout, and although the majority of his company escaped, the commander's Thunderhawk gunship was shot down, exposing as it failed to clear the jungle canopy. Absalon was listed as missing in action, though the Marines Exemplar did not give up hope that he might have survived the crash and was still active behind enemy lines. However, Absalon's second-in-command and successor, Captain Raoul, distanced the chapter from Logan Grimnar's Adeptus Astartes command council, preferring instead to deploy the companies of his chapter as his own advisor saw fit. Sons of Dorn. The Sons of Dorn chapter deployed the bulk of their chapter in the defense of the Imperium from the predations of Abbadon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. They valiantly defended the same worlds along the Eye of Terror that their chapter's legendary hero, Alexandros the Great, had liberated millennia earlier. More than half of the chapter was involved. Subjugators. The Subjugators chapter dispatched 3 companies directly to Cadia within solar days of receiving word that the despoiler had returned, vowing that the remainder of the chapter's resource would be mustered as soon as was possible. The chapter arrived aboard 2 mighty battle barges, just as the Chaos Warfleet was commencing its initial invasion of the Cadia system. The Subjugators threw themselves straight into the conflict, during which the 3rd Company distinguished itself by triggering the reactor overload that destroyed one of the Ramilis-class starforts orbiting Cadia. At the very moment, the forces of Chaos gained control of it. Only a handful of the 3rd Company escaped the subsequent explosion, but their heroic sacrifice undoubtedly saved the lives of many thousands of Imperial defenders on the surface of Cadia, who would otherwise have found themselves facing the might of the Starfort's guns. Yet the Subjugators were reduced to a state of disarray after losing the majority of the 3rd Company in this manner. The 1st and 5th Companies took heavy casualties during the siege of Cadia itself, notably in defense of the Kasar Galan, and the subsequent rearguard actions during the desperate Tarn retreat, and were in serious need of resupply. The Subjugators were a recently founded chapter, and as such maintained only a small reserves of gene seed. The loss of 168 battle brothers who fell on Cadia was a terrible blow to the chapters, particularly as the Subjugators' apothecaries were in most cases unable to recover the gene seed of the fallen. The chapter was eventually faced with the choice of whether to retire from the conflict and regroup, allowing time to rebuild their numbers, or to fight on regardless and risk the death of their chapter through sheer attrition, before it had even had a real chance to make its mark in the annals of the Imperium. White Scars. The first contingent of white scars to reach the Cadian Gate was the Brotherhood of Kajong Khan, a leader known for his victories during the Third War of Armageddon, and a dozen other campaigns. Kajok led his forces against the Chaos hordes massing on Cadia, launching a series of devastating hit-and-run attacks across that world's bleak moors. Within a short period of time, Kajok's Brotherhood had become a major threat to Abbadon's plans, striking deep within enemy-held territory. So effective they were, their actions, that the sieges of Kasruz, can I buy a vow? Mirak, Solikyu, and Rantik were lifted as Chaos forces were diverted to hunt down and confront the elusive White Scars. It would seem that Kajok's attackers were in fact too effective. Kajok's attacks were too effective. Wait, what? Yeah. For Abbadon himself ordered to the Brotherhood hunted down and destroyed once and for all. He knew that the White Scars planned on diverting his forces piecemeal to oppose them. But he reasoned that a full-scale response would be beyond the scope of the small loyalist force to face. Ordering the first company of the Black Legion, as well as uncounted hordes of mutants, traitors, and Chaos cultists out onto the moors, the despoiler began his hunt. It was through the divination of Abbadon's most senior advisor, the Chaos sorcerer Zarafiston, that Kajok was finally located. Unaware that his forces was being watched through Zarafiston's scrying, Kajok launched a raid against an enemy slave train west of Lake Terror, only to discover that the convoy contained not imperial prisoners, but the chosen of Abbadon. The first wave of White Scar bikers hit the convoy, only to find themselves hurling headlong into the guns of the Black Legion. These 4 bike squads, realizing they stood little chance against such a foe, continued their charge nonetheless, determined to buy time for the other warriors of the Brotherhood to regroup. The warriors of the first wave sold their lives dearly, and Kajok reluctantly ordered his men to withdraw, vowing that he would return at a time of his own choosing to avenge the deaths of his battle brothers. But Kajok did not choose the manner of his next confrontation with the enemy, for as his Brotherhood speed across the moors, they found every route cut off by the forces of Chaos. At length, Kajong decided that to flee in the face of the enemy was an insult to the honor of his chapter, and resolved to make a last stand at the base of a pylon on the shores of the Kakudeas Sea, with the pylon to their back and the massed hordes of Chaos. Therefore, the warriors of Kajok's Brotherhood chose to defend themselves, according to the ancient tradition of their homeworld of Corgis, by launching a suicidal charge against the enemy. The 60 White Scars smashed into a horde at least 50 times their own number, Kajok Khan at their head bellowing the battle cry of his chapter. As the Brotherhood smashed through the ranks of the horde, its warriors were torn from their saddle, one by one, falling to the sheer weight of numbers arrayed against them. Kajok rolled his own attack bike through a sea of mutated bodies, clawed arms, and whiplash tentacles, seeking to drag him under with every meter he gained. Kajok Khan was the last of his Brotherhood to fall that day, and the Stormseers of the White Scars claim that his shade remains upon the shadow ruin of Cadia, unwilling and unable to return to the chapter's homeworld of Corgis, until revenge is visited upon the heads of those who slew him. Lortok's evacuations. When Abbadon's fleet was seen approaching the agri-world of Lortox, the Ultramarines Honor Company distinguished itself with a bold spaceborne counter-assault against Abbadon's fleet as the Planet Killer closed with that imperial world on the outskirts of the Agrippina sector. The action bought Lortox's planetary defense forces time to evacuate a significant portion of the population, before the world was destroyed by the despoiler's horrific weapon of planetary destruction. Okay. The Ultramarines Honor Company managed to succeed in crippling the Planet Killer, but the massive warship still had enough power to limp away. In the aftermath of the Lortrax evacuation, the Honor Company redeployed to Cadia and the surrounding star system, launching a series of operations to hinder Abbadon's forces as they assaulted the Imperial positions. These attacks included a series of highly successful boarding action against the lumbering Space Hulks, being used to transport vast hordes of enemy troops to reinforce Abbadon's siege of Cadia. Thracian Primaris. Upon their arrival in the Segmentum Obscurus, the Black Templars chapter's first action was the relief of Thracian Primaris, which had sustained heavy assaults by the forces of Chaos. For some solar weeks, the bulk of the force consisted of brethren previously embarked upon the hunt for Khazgul Mag Uruk Traka, the infamous orc warlord who had unleashed such devastation upon the imperial highworld of Armageddon, and their participants in the action on Thracia Prime left the pursuing Black Templars' crusades severely under strength. The Black Templars scattered the poorly led and deployed Chaos Warfleet in short order, breaking through the blockade to make an uncontested planfall at the Departamento Monitorium Logistical Support Center at Hive Demeter. The Brethren were welcomed as liberators by the beleaguered populace, but chose not to remain on the Hive world for long, moving on to drive the force of Chaos across the Scarus sector back towards the Eye of Terror. Next, we have Battle of Medusa. When the forces of Abbadon, the despoilers, spilled forth from the Cadian Gate in the 99th year of the 41st millennium to launch his 13th Black Crusade, the Iron Hands Space Marine chapter knew that the homeworld of Medusa faced imminent invasion due to their close proximity to the Eye of Terror, and so the chapter scrambled to prepare the defenses. Given that Medusa was the only world from which the Iron Hands recruited new brethren, they were forced to defend it above all other considerations. While it is known that 2 of the chapter's clan companies were deployed elsewhere in the defense of the region, the greater strength of the chapter was used in the defense of their homeworld. The largest battle in the defense of Medusa came when all 10 of the gargantuan tract fortresses of the Iron Hands clan companies faced the invading traitor guardsmen of the Hardani 13th Heavy Armored Regiment. The geologically unstable plains of Medusa played host to one of the largest armored clashes the galaxy has seen since the infamous Battle of Talran during the Horus Heresy, when over 10,000 traitor tanks stormed towards the waiting Iron Hands fortresses. The ensuing battle raged for 5 solar days and 5 solar nights, as the traitors closed within firing range of the Iron Hands mobile fortresses. When the Iron Hands opened fire, it is said that over 100 tanks were destroyed in the first volley, for each clan company commanded firepower equal to a Centurio Ordinatus of the Adeptus Mechanicus. On the 5th solar day, at the height of the battle, the traitors broke through the Iron Hands lines, and an armored company of traitors outflanked one of the chapter's mobile fortresses and fired shell after shell into it at nearly point-blank range. The Iron Hands responded by launching a furious counterattack, spearheaded by assault squads armed with melta-bombs, who leapt from the crenellated towers of the mobile fortress to land atop the enemy tanks. Though many Astartes lost their lives in the attack, shot down by pinto-mounted weapons, or ground beneath the enemy's vehicle's armored tracks, their counterattack was successful in disabling or destroying the majority of the traitor armor and sending the rest into disorderly retreat. It was then that the Iron Hands launched an armored assault of their own, as whole formations of Predator Annihilator tanks disgorged from the mobile fortresses to run down and destroy the heretic tanks with ravening beams of las cannon fire. The Iron Hands managed to secure Medusa by the midpoint of the larger 13th Black Crusade campaign, and were able to deploy several clan companies to the defense of the Cadia system. Though they arrived too late to save Cadia from its fate, an Iron Warrior naval task force was dispatched to reinforce the naval world of Vigilantum. Battle of Castle Tyrok. The Dark Angels and the Space Wolves appeared to set aside their ancient vendetta long enough for Supreme Grandmaster Azrael and the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar to come to a mutual but temporary understanding. The 2 chapters took to the field together and that upon proving the arch-enemy that the combined forces of the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels chapters were far greater than the sum of their parts. The whole circumstances and details of this arrangement have been kept from all who are not members of either chapter. Both chapters took to the fields together in defense of Castle Tyrok upon the world of Cadia against the substantial force of Chaos Mutants. The combined force of Dark Angels and Space Wolves smashed into the rear of the mutant mob, cutting them down without mercy, and each chapter's Astartes vowed to outdo the other in their skill at arms. As the last few mutants were dispatched, the chapter's friendly banter soon turned less camaraderie, and insults filled the air. Victory had been achieved, but the Sons of the Lion and the Sons of Russ soon parted ways, their long-time rivalry rearing its ugly head once again. Battle of Kasr Vasan. The lauded Imperial Fist chapter arrived at the Cadian Gate as part of the massive Adeptus Astartes reinforcement of the region. 5 companies smashing into the forces of the arch-enemy, besieging Cadia as soon as contact was made. After an initial space engagement that saw the chapter's battle barges and strike cruisers take a fearsome toll on the Chaos Warfleet in the Cadian system, 3 of the companies carried out a combat drop on Cadia itself, while the other 2 dispersed to bolster the defenses in the surrounding sectors, including reinforcing the Iron Hands chapter at their homeworld of Medusa. The 1st, 2nd, and elements of the 3rd companies were instrumental in the defense of key points on Cadia, manning the walls of a number of fortresses with a steadfast resolution for which they were famed throughout the Imperium. In these actions, the 2nd Company was noted for exceptional acts of gallantry, overcoming a horde of mutants from the notorious Stigmatus Covenant, numbering almost 10,000 heretical fanatics. At the height of the Chaos Assault on the walls of Kasr Vasan, the company commander, Captain Tialo, gave his life holding a breach in the fortifications, repelling a mob of mutants numbering several hundred before succumbing to the terrible wounds inflicted upon him. The captain's body refused to die, however, and was led in stasis by the chapter's tech marines, who hoped to inter it within the mighty form of a dreadnought, so that the renowned warrior might continue to battle the forces of darkness beyond the death of his mortal body. Battle of Kasar Gihr. Really, let's buy another vow here. Let me make one thing clear, gentlemen. We are now in the fight of our lives. The arch-enemy has come to our home, with greater force and fury than ever before. All that stands between him and victory is us. Us, gentlemen. It is we who must stand before the enemy and turn him back. Why? Because we're here, and there's no one else to do it for us. So if any man here believes he cannot do his duty to the Emperor, then he should present himself before the regimental commissars and stop wasting my time. Lord Castellan Creed, addressing the Cadian commands during the defense of Cadia. The skies above the war zone burned with the falling of orbital ordnance, and the chants of billion lunatics resounded. The tread of mighty battle titans shook the earth, and Imperial Navy fighter craft screamed overhead. The last days of the conflict had come upon the Imperium of Man. The Imperial forces could only pray that no servant of the Emperor faltered in his duties to the master of mankind, for to do so was to surrender humanity itself on the eternal pyre of damnation and ruin. The final stage of the 30th Black Crusade was fought across the Cadian, Agrippina, Bellis Corona, Scarus, Cinchare sectors of the Segmentum Obscurus. On Cadia, the strongholds of the Emperor fell one by one. The Vilcas and Cadus lines of battle buckled beneath the relentless hammering of uncounted enemy troops. Imperial forces on Cadia had been engaged upon a mobile defense, with Lord Castellan Creed marshalling the Astra Militarum regiments under his command to meet each enemy and cut it off before an unstable assault developed. But such were the numbers of the arch-enemy's forces that his strategy quickly proved to be increasingly untenable, forcing the Cadian defenders onto the defensive. As they began to fall back to Kasr Partox, an entire traitor Titan legion marched in line across the horizon. Framed against the blazing sky was millions in this case, not billions, as millions of tons of ordnance fell from orbit. Hordes of mutants swarmed under the Titan's feet, sacrificing themselves to the twisted god machines. Living artillery stalked the battlefield, spewing shells the size of tanks. The chanting of a million madmen could be heard from the ramparts of Kasr Geher. But the Cadian 8th Regiment stood arrayed in companies across Kasr Geher's parade ground. Proud, courageous, and resolute, honor writ large upon the faces of each and every trooper. The Lord Castellan knew he was consigning many within his beloved regiment to their inevitable deaths. Furthermore, the troops knew it, and were proud to know it. They cared not, for they would upheld the pride of the Lord Castellan's own, Cadia and their sacred duty to the Emperor. That evening, the enemy launched their assault upon the citadel. It was presaged by a terrible, chilling wailing that bit deep into each man's sanity, but none wavered. Then a thunderous artillery barrage rained death and destruction upon the walls. But still the 8th Cadian refused to falter. Then came the first waves, and the men and women of the 8th Cadian opened fire upon them. A blazing wall of last fire sprang across the rapidly closing gap before the walls, and the enemy fell by the thousands. Many exhausted their last gun's charges in what seemed mere moments, and reached for a second charge when the regimental standard-bearer, Yaren Kel, bellowed the Castellan's orders for every second company to stand down from the walls. The rear guard would assemble, and so the retreat of the Imperial forces towards Kasr Partox began. Some 10 companies had held to the last to allow the remainder of the 8th Cadian time to fall back. These brave 3,000 troops were to abandon their position at the last possible moment. But something went wrong. They were encircled, cut off, and eventually overrun and captured. A solar day later, the Imperial forces learned of the fate of the men captured at Kasr Geher. They were ritually disemboweled before the Imperial positions on the Vilkas line. The effect upon Imperial morale was utterly devastating, and it was all the commissars could do to contain the air of defeat that soon settled over many units. As the Battle of Cadia reached towards its climax, the will of its defenders hung on the knife's edge. Death of Macaria. It was a fool's dream to hope the planet killer could be found before it was brought to bear upon Imperial forces. Without warning, it appeared in the orbit over the world of Macaria in the Cadian system. Though many could scarcely believe it, the world was destroyed by the massive vessel. It was lost. And with it, millions of the Emperor's loyal and faithful subjects, dead at the hands of Abbadon the despoiler, and his most fearsome and despicable weapon. Utter dread now descended upon the Cadian High Command. Despite the many successes won by Imperial forces, many Cadian officers had come to believe that the war might not be won in the short term. Where at first the Imperial forces had fought to repulse the assault of the despoiler, to deny Abbadon's footholds upon their worlds, they now fought to keep the forces of chaos from simply overwhelming them entirely. This was a grim paradigm, and one of the Imperial forces were not ready to accept. They believed Abbadon dare not destroy Cadia using his planet killer, or the Blackstone Fortress, as the fortress world's ancient Xenos-built pylons were reckoned intrinsic to the continuous stability of the Cadian Gate's passage out of the Eye of Terror, and deeper into Imperial space. So the Imperium defenders decided that they would stand and hold at Cadia, no matter the cost. Wait, I already read this one. It was only that Macaria died. Oh well. Battle of Kasr Partox. The valiant Imperial defenders of Cadia made their final stand upon the ramparts of Kasr Partox against the forces of chaos arrayed against them. A massive force of the arch-enemy stood to assault the valiant Imperial defenders. The fortress city was protected by a scant 23rd regiments of the Cadian shock troops. Alongside the regiments of Cadia stood a host of units drawn from the worlds near and far, such as the Novians, Gondorites, Mordants, Thracians, Yorans, and 1,000 more. The battle brothers of the Adeptus Astartes were also counted amongst the Imperial defenders, including the chapters of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, Ultramarines, Doom Eagles, and many more that are not named in Imperial records. There are also many other servants of the God Emperor present, including the Battle Sisters of the Orders Militant of the Adepta Sororitas, the mighty Grey Knights, scores of Inquisitors, the Siege Dreadnoughts of the Order Reductor. Interesting. The mighty God Machine of the Collegia Titanica, and the Mechanicus' own cybernetic Skitari warriors. And among them all, the confessors of the Imperial cult made their way, admonishing each and every man and woman to hold truth to the Emperor. But the Imperial defenders numbered pale in comparison to those arrayed against them. Even from atop the mighty walls of the Castle Castellum, it was observed that not a single square meter of ground was not held by the defenders or trodden upon by the enemy. It seemed as if every twisted denizen of the Eye of Terror had converged before the walls of Castle Partox. In the ensuing slaughter, the Imperials were forced to abandon Castle Partox and retreat towards the Caucasian Sea, where they hoped to make their final stand at Castle Galan. With Castle Paratox fallen, the Imperial commander and control structure was demolished. The Imperial retreat from Castle Partox saw the most intense fighting of the 13th Black Crusade, with many thousands of lives given up so that the bulk of the Imperial forces might escape. The Imperial forces managed to make it to the Caucasia Sea, leaving behind thousands of dead, their bodies defiled by the blasphemous Chaos Horde. The Imperial Guard forces fled aboard transport ships across the Caucasian Sea, forced to abandon the bulk of their heavy equipment. One of the last groups to leave was the ecclesiarchal delegation, whose thousands of preachers had attended to the spiritual well-being of Imperial forces throughout the fighting withdrawal from the Partox. Some of these remained in the port, determined to preach the word of the Emperor until the very end, and their sonorous chants at the time were set to drown out even the thunderous explosions of enemy artillery. A company of space marines from the subjugators, whose number had been so reduced during their participation in the defense of Cadia so as to threaten the very survival of their chapter, chose to also make a final stand there, vowing to evacuate only when all else was lost. Imperial Guard engineers planted munition at the heart of the port in order to ensure its destruction.